the role of an art teacher. So, here's a cartoon of a teacher in front of a bunch of different animals. And the teacher is saying, hey, you all have to take this same exam, and I want you to climb that tree. That is your exam. That's the only test I'm going to give you for all of you animals. But there's all kinds of different animals with all kinds of disabilities. There's a thing. Are they disabilities or abilities? So, elephant has a completely set of abilities than a monkey. Neither of them are better than the other. Okay, so that's our issue. Animal kingdom includes us humans. We are all different. We're all unique. We all have different ways to climb our own tree, metaphorically speaking, as the tree being our potential for life. So today I will discuss how special education has evolved from a very narrow mindset to a very much more open mindset in believing that everyone should be included and everyone should have a seat at the table. Here's another quote that supports that. Supports the cartoon that Albert Einstein said. He said, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." I included this ironic picture of a climbing fish. It is apparently a fish that can climb. I don't know if there are other fish that can climb. Maybe this is just the only exception. Either way, it's ironic and funny. And this little Picasso quote inspires me as an art teacher. Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain one when you grow up. So some initial ideas on how to include students with special needs in the classroom. So I have my own prior knowledge of some basic teaching skills for students in art based on my previous experience teaching at art camps and teaching at a nonprofit. I will be learning tons and tons more as I study best practices formally in a school setting. But based on what we've learned so far and my experience in the past, on the right side in the black is a list of things we will go through. On the right, that's the right side. The right side is the black list of things we're going to go through right now. And then on the left side in purple are things we will go through later on. So on the right side, suggestions for classroom setup and structure. So how is your classroom set up? Is it in a circle or is it top-down method where the teacher's at the front of the room, students are in the front of the class, and some students are in the back of the class? Maybe the students in the back of the class could be getting distracted or could be doing their own thing and not paying attention. And then students at the front could be at an advantage because they're in the teacher's eyesight. So how is the classroom set up? Also with supplies and such. Classroom management techniques. How do you keep a lesson plan on track? How do you make sure your students are involved and being active and not passive? What attention grabbers are there? A demonstration of available assistive technology and an adaptation suggestions. So are there iPads in your classroom? If a student is not good at reading, is there a way that the student can have the technology to listen to an audiobook, etc.? So details matter. Be very specific with instructions. Provide some kind of visual aid, perhaps, such as pictures describing step by step what to do for an art project. And maybe that includes Braille. Specifics regarding individual student rituals. So what are some peculiarities of that student and what they like to do from the beginning of the class to the end of the class? Do they have certain habits that need to be paid attention to? Nonverbal students' responses to stress. What things set kids off? Students' personal interests and activities. What does your student like to do outside of class? It's important to get a knowledge of what your students are like. How do their family members interact with their students? And how are they supportive of the students' education outside of the classroom? So, to set us up with some questions about special education, what do we need to know about students with special needs? And what do we know about special education, SPED? What are our own personalities and our challenges and potential advantages? So, knowing myself, I know that I'm a visual learner and a learner by doing. So, being an art teacher is great for me because I get to troubleshoot projects and come up with the plans and make sure they're completed and see how it works step by step in my own time, and then I implement it. So, I learn and then I teach. I learn by doing. Some challenges I could have are I am pretty equally introverted or extroverted, and so there could be times when I don't feel like being very extroverted, and there could be times when I am not quiet enough. So the balance between the two for me is what I am challenged with. So, the federal, state, and local guidelines that are required to follow in order to meet the needs of students with disabilities. Who's in charge of public education? Federal, state, or local? Local entities are in charge. And how do we pay for public education? Public education is paid through local and property tax. What laws govern public education? State standards and federal guidelines. We will get into the history in the next few slides, but as we can see here, for example, laws heavily govern our public education. One of the biggest amendments that do so affected our special education was the 14th Amendment. So the Brown versus Board of Education of 1954 was desegregation. Plessy versus Ferguson was separate but equal in the late 1800s. So that meant there was two different kinds of school. There was a school for black people and a school for white people. And people said it was separate but equal, but it really wasn't when there were some investigations done. For example, apparently there was some schools, some all-black schools, that would just be getting their primary textbooks were donated by white schools. It was their rejected old books, and the black students had to use those. That is not equal. That is not enabling students to have the most up-to-date education to ensure the potential to thrive in this society. So that is separate but not equal. Even though it says separate but equal here, that's just what it was named under the law. But Brown versus Board proved that they were separate but not equal. So Brown versus Board desegregated the schools. Also, this relates to protection for gay rights as well. So last year they made gay marriage legal because people were saying, oh, so a man and a woman could get married under the law, but I can't get married to another person of the same sex. That is separate. So the law was made so that you could be equal. So the history of special education started with the 1950s with what I just talked about in Brown versus Board of Education and the integration with students at Little Rock. In the 1960s, there was more work to be done thanks to Martin Luther King, Civil Rights Act of 1964, guaranteed desegregation in public spaces, and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which later turned into No Child Left Behind, gave federal support for schools equality no matter where you grow up. So that's, equal opportunity, free and reduced lunch to make sure that poor populations could be able to go to school and be able to be fed. And Title I schools came out of that. Children with disabilities at this time weren't a part of this stuff. So this is where things started to shift. Children with disabilities were being sent to institutions. So they were separate but not equal. And parents started to say, that's not right. I want to be around my daughter or son. And I want them to be in school with my other daughters and sons. I want them to be part of the family. I gave birth to them. I want them to be part of my life. So, out of that came the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which later turned into IDEA. So, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This entails zero rejection. So anybody can go to school and be a member of the classroom. So even a student with no brainstem, someone who can't even, who can't feed themselves, and is pretty much paralyzed, they are still by law able to have the right to go to school and be taken care of by special education or paraprofessional or whatever the school has to provide for them. They have to be included. So inclusion, mainstreaming, this is the mainstreaming law. This is, being able to be your own kind of fish swimming in the sea of all the other fishes. FAPE, which stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. It guaranteed that public education was free and appropriate to that unique individual. And LRE stands for Least Restricted Environment, which means that a student gets to have the special education services provided to them in their neighborhood or in the closest neighborhood to them. So they have to have good access to it, an environment that is proper for them to be able to learn and thrive with their special needs. IEPs, which stands for Individual Education Plan, which are unique sets of learning guidelines to ensure the student's progress. Due process of law, this made sure that there was a paper trail so that parents of the students with special needs could understand if they were treated fairly or not treated fairly or not fairly. So that brings in lawyers and making sure everything is right legally. Excuse me. So IDEA is for our children 3 to 21, even homeless children, children with limited English proficiency, and it also brings in related services such as speech, art, and music therapy. So art education then and now just refers to art education like in the 1970s, while these first laws for folks with special education needs were developing. Art was more so a related service, ancillary to the more academic subjects. But now Art therapy is considered a related service, while art education has achieved the status as a core academic subject for all students. So IDEA keeps improving, and IDEIA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, and this is in 2004. So like I said, these laws or acts are living and breathing things. It's a process. It's sequential growth to how we evolve our best practices for caring and teaching special students with special education. So IDEIA eliminates short-term objectives in IEPs, modifies eligibility to support more parent involvement, high academic achievement standards for faculty, which means that faculty needs more academia, needs to learn more best practices to be able to provide for their students as much as they can. New procedures to identify learning disabilities. So instead of just doing that basic IQ test, doing some other kinds of testing to see how a child behaves. Transition plans are a very important thing that are a part of this, which means that beginning at the age of 16, a student with special needs will be taken care of in terms of a step-by-step how they will be able to take care of themselves outside of school once they're done with the system, how they will be able to, get ready for work and have a job and be able to take care of themselves, personal care and such. More flexibility in state funds came out of IDEIA, and then the reduce the paperwork and focus on teaching and learning. While there's still a purpose for a paper trail, just not so much paperwork so that teachers can get to the real work of creating a better education. And then more support for development of technology, which just means bringing in more computers or technologies that assist a student with special needs to be able to read, write, or orally be able to learn. And then there's the No Child Left Behind Act that was put into place in 2001. And they're very similar, IDEA and NCLB. NCLB made sure there was more accountability, highly qualified teachers, more science-based intervention, definitely a big focus on more testing, safe schools, and parent participation and choice. So parents had the choice to opt in or out of certain testings. I went over the IDEA stuff. Okay, so kind of how this all ties into being an art teacher, including special education students in my classroom. As an art teacher, I will need to pay attention to certain sensitivities of students, and I will need to be able to supplement their IEPs with different kinds of forms of learning, and art is great for that. Art provides visual means, art is sensory, it's very tactile, so oftentimes students with special needs are able to respond to those things. There are some sensitivities, like for example, I included this picture, maybe somebody with a tactile sensitivity who doesn't like to feel the texture of paint, they could feel paint move through a clear plastic cover here, and they can finger paint without getting dirty. Providing special visual instruction through the use of symbol and art words, by having flashcards, or I could have posters in my room that have certain art words in it, as you can see on the right here. And we will get more and more into universal design for learning, it seems like, in this class. And from what we've learned so far with UDL, it's just being sensitive to different learning styles and intelligence preferences, whether you're visual, you're auditory, if you're a group learner or an individual learner, if you are good at taking tests or if you're better at taking projects. I am very thankful that in college I finally realized all this UDL stuff started to come out, because I remember being in private Catholic middle school when I don't think there was too many other options unless I was in the special education department, which I was not. I was just in general education. And I didn't realize that there's such a thing as universal design for learning until I went to college, where my teachers were giving me options for what I could do for my projects. They would let me make something, make an art piece to supplement a paper for a class, or they would let me do a presentation instead of take a test, etc. So, going back to this slide on some ideas on how to include students with special needs in the classroom, it's all about inclusion, right? And my responsibility as an art teacher will be to ensure access to the general education curriculum, to be aware of content standards, formats, and schedules, to participate in IEP meetings, to continue to remain educated about the diverse contribution to the arts, and to understand IEPs, the needs and accommodations required for each student. So when a student comes into my art room, I will be handed a list of their IEPs, and I will have to be sensitive to the needs of the student. And I will also have to make sure that my curriculum can merge with other things in different subjects students are learning. So some resources that are available for the role as an art teacher. There's www.cde.state.co.us, and that is the legal site for all the special education law. Reaching and Teaching and other textbooks. Really talking to the special education teacher and paraprofessionals and understanding the details of that student's special needs, because what's on paper might not really signify what's really going on in that student's life. Also, something that I saw in the textbook, Reaching and Teaching, was a paragraph that mentioned it's good to read these texts and articles by these following authors. I have not read them yet, but I plan to, because the book said they were good. And then this little image down here depicts the students' IEP team, and that includes, the regular education teachers, school system representative, transition services agency representatives, parents, others with knowledge, a person who can interpret evaluation results, special education teachers or providers, etc. And then lastly, there is this little exercise that I encountered while I was listening to a TED Talk by Cindy Foley, and she's an art teaching advocate, art teacher herself. And her whole idea is that we have to think creatively to be able to be effective learners and teachers, and that there's not one way to learn something. So she has this example here. It has 3 things, 3 objects, and underneath it are 3 spaces for letters, or some kind of, word to be put into those boxes. And this one is log, number 8 is rug, but then number 7 was left empty. And we can just think to ourselves what number 7 might be based on our own knowledge of what this visually might represent. There's 3 boxes there underneath it. What could we put in those 3 boxes? I don't know. Rug, log, they don't really rhyme, so why does it matter what we put underneath number 7? Let's look to the next one. Her daughter put the word art underneath that object, and her teacher corrected her wrong. The teacher labeled her answer wrong, as the teacher wrote that mud was the right answer. So what Cindy Foley is bringing up is this idea of how can something so nebulous be judged as so concrete? It's an interesting thing to think about. Art offers the nebulous and the concrete to do this sensitive kind of dance. And art education, specifically with special needs students, I feel will show that everyone is unique and ambiguity is okay. It reminds us to not think so concretely just because it's testable, even though there are ways to test students with special needs. It's important to be creative, curious, seek questions, and play. And art's critical value in how we teach for creativity to measure success in our special needs students is an important thing to pay attention to. Thank you. And that is the end.